Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. Brought to you by Blue Sky Business Consulting. We discuss 5 questions in about 15 minutes. Hi again, everyone. We're glad you could join us for another episode of the Team Engagement Podcast. I am excited to welcome our guest today, all the way from Westford, Massachusetts. This is Bryon Beilman, and he is the CEO of iuvo. And Bryon, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join me for the podcast today. What would you like the audience to know about iuvo?
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be on the show. Thank you for inviting me. iuvo, we're a managed services. We're an IT consulting company and managed services here in the Boston area. We are either the IT department for some companies, or we are subject matter experts for those who don't have the expertise in IT. All things cloud, security, just about anything dealing with IT infrastructure. That's what we do. So yeah, that's the short of it. But yeah, iuvo.
Yeah, it's a growing industry, to say the least, because all of IT is growing. So that's a great service that you're offering, because people like me who don't want to worry about the IT stuff, it's good to know we've got people like you. So that's fantastic. Yeah. All right, well, let's get started with our questions today. Our first question. Now, Bryon, as you've been kind of growing your business, I'm sure that there are some things that you've had to kind of overcome that you're especially proud of, a challenge or a setback or something that you're especially proud of. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that kind of an experience?
Sure. So iuvo has been around for 16 years. So throughout that time, we definitely reached plateaus in our business, where we see something visibly, or something's not working, or revenue is not growing where it needs to be, or whatever. And so we had to take the time to pivot or reset moments. And there's just a couple I've been thinking about here. And one of them is that, when we were very early in the company, I have a co-founder named Jeff, and we were running the company, and we had a lot of people doing work for us. And we realized, gosh, we just cannot scale if it's just us, right? We have to. This is broken. And so we basically created a team of directors. We empowered them to do things, gave them, open the books, open all the information to them, and said, we need your expertise. We hired you because you're great. And we saw it, like, if you look at a revenue graphs, it's like it was kind of flat a little bit. And then we did that, and it jumped up because we were the bottleneck, right? And so it started reinforcing things like we could, this is the right way to go. I think that, and then fast forward a little later on, which is fairly, a little more recent, is that we've been trying to align the whole company towards goals and effectively and be efficient, because same thing. We get these plateau points, like, well, we're doing pretty well, but we got some problems here. So we weren't drilling down, like we had like objectives or goals. We weren't necessarily drilling down on what was important. So we embraced something called EOS. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's the entrepreneurial operating system. There's lots of different versions of it out there. The one we chose, we self-implemented, but it really allowed us to have a language and a structure to organize our business, our goals, be accountable. And so that was a big change in our business, because instead of saying, well, here's our org chart, here's our chart of accountability, here's who accountable for these things. So both of those. And we're going to have future roadblocks, and we're going to have to figure out how to get over those. But those are kind of challenges that I think that worked out pretty well.
That's fantastic. And that's a great example of being willing, because I run into this all the time with the clients that I work with. They sometimes get that bottleneck that you were referring to. They try to do it all themselves, and they don't realize that you're now limiting yourself, and you've got to be able to scale and to grow. And I love how you shared that example. That's a great example.
Yeah.
All right. Well, question number 2, how can leaders help to foster and kind of cultivate creativity within their team or company?
Well, I think creativity comes from, part of it comes from the ability to take a risk, and so I think if you want people to be creative and a company to be creative, you have to empower the people to say, hey, you're empowered to do something creative. You're empowered to do your job in your own unique way. And so you have to make sure that they understand the end goal, and that you have their back, or that they have the will, the ability to make a mistake, for example. So if they know they can make a mistake, because any kind of thing creative is not always perfect on the first time, then and it's like, that's great, you made a mistake, did you learn from the mistake? And then you go on. So you hire great people really to do great work. So you can't, you got to let them do that work. And so that comes from a kind of a culture of that being empowered. I think the final part that ties it all in, I think, is providing a framework for them to do that. And it sounds counterintuitive, like, you want to be creative, but you want to give them a framework. Isn't that bounding them up? But I think of it like the English language. You have nouns, you have verbs, you have adjectives, you've got a dictionary thesaurus, you've got all these tools, you get rules of English, sentence structure, and it allows people to really write, great novels, poetry, whatever, because they're very creative, but they have this structure, and I call it similar to a framework. So we found that we were doing some of these like creative things, and one of the things I think is creative with us is outside of the marketing role. Marketing is always pretty creative, but productizing things, like, we want to make a product out of this. So we create this framework, and people can work independently because they know, oh, here's the things that are going to help me get success, get support. And it's like kind of the English language. So I think if you have some structure, people know what to expect, they can run with it. I think it allows people to be creative. You could, so that's kind of that's the approach I take.
Oh, I love that. I love that approach, because you're absolutely right. We do need to have a little bit of a framework, some guardrails, if you will, but allowing people to kind of take risks, like you were talking about, and make the mistakes once in a while, but create that environment where it's okay to make a mistake once in a while, as long as it's not too over the top. But that's what a lot of those guardrails and that framework that you're talking about can help, is to make sure people stay within certain guidelines, so any mistakes or risks aren't too far out there that they're unmanageable. But I love your approach, Bryon. I love how you're doing that with your company, that you're creating that environment of creativity. So well done. Well, question number three.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, just one little add-on to that is that we found that the mistakes were made were so minuscule compared to the results that happened, because you let them do that. So you worry about mistakes, but they don't happen as much as you think they're going to happen.
Well, and sometimes, and we're going to get back to this question in just a minute, but it's kind of like, well, sometimes a mistake isn't always a mistake. Sometimes it turns into a win, but we'll come back to that here in just a second. Sure. Question number three: how can leaders help the team members or the employees trust each other?
Yeah, trust is super important. I think that your whole organization has to have trust, and I think to do that, and one way we've tried to do this is you have to hire the best people. So you hire really A+ players who are good at their job, they work hard, they have a growth mindset, that type of thing. When you start hiring lower quality people, the stars don't want to work with them, and they don't trust them because they're working hard, they're doing things. And so I'm going to clarify that a little bit, because I'm not saying that you're not hiring, only hire people with 25 years of experience and, and have a PhD. I'm talking about people that even young in their career that have a lot to offer. They bring new skills to the table. They work hard. They have a growth mindset. And so they start respecting each other and trusting each other. So they know that they all have each other's backs. And so I think that, I found that sometimes if you hire somebody who's not quite in that area, whatever it might be, the quality of the company that you're looking for, it tends to come out pretty quickly. And so I think the one way to help that happen and help this culture of trust is about your core values. So if you have a core values and you're establishing the company, you say, these are our core values, we're going to live by them. And if people join that, I'm going to join this company because I believe in your core values. They're aligned with mine. But they also expect them to be upheld. So if you have a core value of collaboration and someone's not collaborating, then anybody in the company should say, hey, you're not collaborating. You need some coaching, or you're either going to be coached to get better, or you're going to be coached out. But I think, it's just that people know that the core values are, again, it's almost like creativity. Do what you want, but follow your core values are your guidelines. And we work really hard on our core values. And it's made a big difference because we can hire, we can fire, we can promote based on like achieving or realizing and living the core values.
I just absolutely love that, because it's shocking to me how many companies have a vague idea of what their core values are, but they don't make them a part of everyday work environment and the culture, because they're not using that to drive decisions. They're not using that to hold people accountable. I love that you're doing that, because it makes a huge difference when the employees kind of know what's expected of them and know this is how we do things here. And I love your example of collaboration. Hey, if we're going to collaborate together and we get a sense that you don't collaborate very well, we're going to call you out on it in a good way, but we're going to,
Yeah,
want
of course.
the collaboration. I love that. Love that. All right. Well, let's kind of go back then. Our question number 4 is something we touched on just a second ago. Bryon, if you can kind of reflect on a time when maybe you had to endure a setback or a failure, but you turned it into a win. Let's hear about that experience.
Well, I've had so many failures. I think you're not afraid to try some new things. Talk about, a culture of allowing some failures, but I'm going to go a little outside the box on this one. But it's it was something that was had troubled us for a while. So we hired a high performing jerk, right? This person, they were a fast worker. They had strong opinions. They did really great. Honestly, they did a lot of good things for the company. And so we let's keep going. But the challenge was they said they tout the culture, but they were backstabbing everybody in the other, that kind of thing. They were kind of causing disruption in the company, but but on the outside they were like, yeah, you did all this great work. So when that person left, it really allowed us to find out that we had a missing core value that I talked about earlier, which was humility. And that was important to us. And we said, oh, you know what? We need humility, because in this particular case, the person took credit for everything that went well and denied everything that went bad. So like, how can you not be part of everything? So we analyzed as a team. We became even closer. We started to trust each other more. We realized we could have straightforward, even if they're difficult conversations, like, hey, I'm not really happy with the way this happened here. How can we, so it allowed us to by having this disruption in our business, and it wasn't necessarily the business part of it, but it was kind of the functional way the company worked. It was kind of a troubling time, but we learned a lot from it. We became a much stronger company, a much stronger leadership team because of that. So I don't know if that's quite a failure. Like, we hired the wrong person, we didn't really realize it, but we hung on a little longer than we should have, because they did a lot of good stuff.
Well, that's the challenge, especially with personnel, because if somebody's doing a great job, you don't want to just pull the rug out and cause disruption that could be bigger than the problem. But I do appreciate and respect the fact, Bryon, that you decided, hey, this is not quite the right fit, and what can we do to prevent it from happening again? Because that's all that really failure is. It's learning from it and saying, okay, we don't want this to happen again. What can we do to prevent it, or make sure that we're responding in the right way, or whatever the case may be? But a great response, great example. Glad it turned into a win for you. Well, question number 5, our last question, is kind of a fun question, but tell us a little bit about your first job.
So my first job was at 14 years old. I mean, outside of mowing lawns and randomly doing things, like, this was my first official job. And I've had I've had a job ever since. I really haven't had any gaps since I was 14 years old, and I'm 55 years old. But it was I was a busboy at a Chinese restaurant. I started a dishwasher. I got promoted to busboy. I rode my bike to work. Busy place, had to hustle. It felt good to have a job. Looking back at some things I understand now, but it was kind of interesting, is that I was paid in all cash, kind of under the table, not on the table, but he would like pay people, like, I'm not sure. There was no taxes or anything ever accounted for. Yeah. People in the kitchen barely spoke English, but we got to go along just fine. And here's the strange thing. I got food poisoning twice from that job, from their own food. I didn't realize that was food poisoning until later on. When I found out what food poisoning was, like, oh my God, I got food poisoning from the place I worked at. So, but it was a good experience overall. I don't have any regrets about it.
Oh, I love that. I probably have said this quite a few times during the podcast when I talk to guests, and they share a job where they were in a service industry of some kind and how it shaped them. And a lot of them say, I never want to do it again, but I learned a lot from whatever it was that they were doing. But I love that. I'm sorry you got food poisoning, but at the same time.
Well, I did like the food. It just didn't, sometimes you realize maybe they weren't as clean as they should have been.
Right. Something got missed. So, well,
Yeah.
Bryon, this has been great. Thank you so much again for taking time out of your busy schedule to share a little bit of your wisdom and insights. How can people find you?
Well, first place is our website, which is iuvotech.com, iuvotech.com. And for me personally, I'm on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is LinkedIn/IN/ I think it's BBEILMAN, or look me up, Bryon Beilman. I'm very active in LinkedIn. I like to share. I like to help network. I like to, so personally LinkedIn, but if you want to check out our website, we share lots of content as well. So we'd love to share anything you want that's of value to you.
Fantastic. Bryon, thank you again. Really appreciate it. And thanks again to all of you who are either watching or listening. We always appreciate you joining us every week. We look forward to seeing and watching you next week. Thanks so much. This is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, go to teamengagementpodcast.com. We also invite you to follow or subscribe to our podcast wherever you may be listening or watching. Is your business thriving? Go to tbs-score.com to find out. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.